Night is Donald Coleman Jr. Donald, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you. Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Okay, I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee. My dad was an automobile car salesman. He bought a VW franchise in Dyersburg, Tennessee, and moved there when I was 9 years old in 1966. I was educated in the Memphis and Dyersburg city school systems, graduated from Dyersburg High School in 1975, went to Dyersburg State Community College, had 2 years degree in criminal justice. I began my law enforcement career at the age of 18 in November of 1975 at Trimble Police Department in Dyer County, Tennessee. And I went to school off and on and kind of bounced around here and there and worked for the Hardin County Sheriff's Department at age 19. Got on in various law enforcement agencies, and mostly in the small rural areas of West Tennessee and over into Middle Tennessee. In Wayne County, I'm a graduate of the Tennessee Law Enforcement Training Academy at Donaldson, Tennessee in May 1981. I was state certified, academy trained, also trained by Tennessee State Troopers. Eventually made my way into the Mississippi State Parks with the Mississippi Department of Natural Resources Division of Parks and Recreation. I was a park ranger at Walddoxie to Holly Springs from 84 to 85. Transferred to Grenada at U White State Park. I was a senior park ranger at Outlet Channel Campground. It was a 175-pad campground. I was there from 85 to 89. Took a transfer to Golden Memorial State Park in Walnut Grove, Mississippi, and that's in the northeast central part of the state. Was there from 89 to 92. When I had my encounter with the first creature was in the summer of 1991. Now, Golden Memorial State Park is on Highway 492 outside of Walnut Grove, Mississippi. That park was a two-county park. It was in Scott County, Mississippi, and Lee County, Mississippi. Sebastopol and Walnut Grove were two very small hamlets. So when I was married, my wife wanted to go to a little bit bigger city, so we went down to Forest, which is the county seat of Scott County, Mississippi. We traveled down Highway 35, which is Mississippi Highway 35, between Walnut Grove and Forest, shopped, different stores, and took the kids to McDonald's and things like that. Coming back, it was at night, between 9 and 10. We were around the little community I want to call Harper Valley. Of course, it was like the Harper Valley PTA song. I said, how come I remember it? I was in a 1987 Honda Accord. I'm 6'4", 295 pounds. I was the assistant park manager, but I had park management authority at that park. And this creature crossed in front of my Honda Accord. It was like a flash of maybe 5 seconds. And it was camel colored. It had yellow eyes. It had a wild look in its face. It almost looked like a hind in the facial part of it. But it was so fast, I had to slam on the brakes from hitting this thing. It was covering up the whole Honda Accord. My head is the top of that car because I'm so big. I wanted to stop, but my wife says, you're not stopping this car with these kids in here. You're going to hit the gas. We're getting out of here. Terrified her, scared her. When we got back to my park manager's residence at the park, she said, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to even hear about this. And, that was the end of the story. And then I left the park system in 92, relocated to her home in Savannah in March of 1992. And I didn't see any more of that creature at all because some people, they keep wild, exotic animals. I'm trying to explain to myself, well, maybe this escaped and is on the run. So I didn't think anything about it. I said maybe it was a wild hyena that somebody will kill it because, there's down in Mississippi, they'll pull a gun quicker than you slap an Alabama dick. They won't put up with this. So I thought, well, that's the end of that. So when I moved to Savannah, I lived up there, and I didn't see anything, but I heard a story when I was working at Aqua Glass Corporation in Adamsville. This guy named Jack, was in 2003. He was telling me a story, and Jack had a tendency to stretch the truth a little bit. I said, Jack, and I'm going to ask you a question. I want it point blank honest. Tell me this story again, but this time put your hand on that Bible, because I want to make sure you're telling me the gospel truth here. He told a story. He was in Stantonville, which is outside of Shiloh National Park, on Highway 142. His truck broke down. It was toward the late evening. He was going to walk out to a convenience store. Something came out of the woods, scared him, growled at him, and chased him back to his truck. He got in his truck, and he didn't get out of there till noon the next day. He was terrified.
The one in 91 that you saw, could you describe that one for us a little better?
Well, it looked like it was a flash. I mean, it was like maybe 4 seconds. I had to slam on my brakes to keep from hitting it. I was in the Honda Accord, a four-door, so it was probably bigger than that whole car. But my head was at the top of that Honda Accord, so I'm 6'4", and this thing is bigger than that. But his head was kind of, I saw the head, and it looked like a hyena. That's what it looked like to me. I thought, of course, people have these wild, exotic animals, and I thought maybe this thing escaped and is just running wild out here. We both saw it, but we saw almost like, did we see what we thought we saw? You know, it's like one of those deals. And I wanted to stop and get out of the car. She wouldn't let me. And so I had to go back to my park manager's residence on the park. So we lived on the state parks. So that was the incident right there. See what I'm trying to tell you? It was so brief. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't smell it. I didn't do anything. It just ran in front of my car.
I realize you only got a split second to look at this thing, but to describe its coat, how would you do that? What did you see?
Well, it was a thick coat, but it was camel color. It was kind of a tannish, brownish color, the way I would describe it. And it had a big head on it. And I remember that head being pretty good size. And it was moving so fast. I mean, I saw something coming up out of the road, because, you know, you have to be careful with deer out on the roadway at night. That's no matter what year or where you're at. You have to be watching for deer, because they'll always out eating on the side of the road or whatever. And apparently I caught the peripheral vision of something crossing in front of my car, and then when I put the high beams on it, I caught him. I caught him in the high beams, and that's what illuminated that animal to us.
You said it was camel in color. Was it all
kind
one?
of a camel tan color. It had a mane, you know, like a, behind his neck, it was a thick coat of whatever it was.
So this was all one color?
This was all one color, but it looked like a hyena in the face. But it's like the markings didn't add up.
You're not the first person who's reported seeing one of these things that had that hyena appearance to it. Don't think it's just you who's seen something like that. How big did it look?
Well, like I said, I'm 6'4", and I'm in a Honda Accord, and that means I'm 2 feet off the ground already. And I'd say that thing's over 8 feet tall on all fours.
You know, in the pre-interview, when you first told me about it being or looking like it was around 8 feet on all fours, I reeled at first, but there was another law enforcement agent, actually a state trooper, who reported a sighting to me. The one he saw was pushing 8 feet while on all fours.
Well, Mississippi Highway 35 is heavily traveled. It's got a lot of traffic on it, but when I saw it coming out of the roadway, I hit those bright lights. That's what caught it right there. But if I hadn't had a great peripheral vision, I think we'd have met out there on 35. It'd have been bad.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a good scene running into something like that that's that big. All right, Donald, please tell us about the next encounter you had.
Okay, the next encounter, let me back up a little bit, got ahead of myself, was in February of 1995. I was with my parents in my green Cutlass, and we were just driving around, you know, looking at the houses mostly and stuff. And coming out of Iuka, we were about between the Goat Island area, there's Goat Island Road, and then right on down the hill is Elk Landing Road, and they all go to the Pickwick Lake, Yellow Creek area. Anyway, we were going back north on 25, and there's the Corinth and Council Railroad overpass bridge, and next to the bridge, probably about maybe 50 yards, was a red brick house. Between the levee and that red brick house comes another creature coming out of the woods. I saw it when I was at the top of that hill at Goat Island Road. I slowed down to make sure I'm seeing another creature. You know, I'm thinking to myself, why am I seeing this? But this creature, once I got up to about where it crossed in front of my car, which I was a half a car length, you know, behind that creature, looked at that thing solid black. It looked like a Great Dane. The ears were pointed. It didn't show any teeth. It was on all fours. It was huge. This thing, when it went in front of me, I drove past it, turned around in my seat to look, see where it was going, and it went into a kudzu bank and disappeared. I wanted to stop again, but my parents were in there, and they just had a fit and told me, don't stop, let's go. Let's don't talk about this. So it was kind of like you have to be quiet about what you saw. And they saw it, but it scared them, and they didn't want me to talk about it because I'm the one. I want to talk. What is this? It had sinister eyes. The eyes they weren't glowing, but they were mean, and he had an evil presence about it. And I had to go on down the road, and I was thinking to myself, again? And this is up close to where I recreate at Pickwick Lake, I thought. In the railroad tracks, if you go straight into the woods where I saw this thing come out, about 5 miles away is Chambers Creek Swamp, and it runs from the Tennessee River to Highway 72 down around Burnsville, Mississippi. So it's a long swamp.
Well, I can tell you that they do seem to be very fond of swamps, so if you're around a swamp, that really does increase the chances of that happening.
But why would this come out in the residential? There's residential houses all over the place down there when I saw this thing.
I know it's hard to believe, but they do come into areas like that, more than most people would ever imagine or want to imagine. But like you said, I'm sure you were starting to wonder what it was with all these encounters you had been having. I can't explain it, but it does seem like once you get on these things' radar, it's not uncommon to have repeat encounters. And also, too, Donald, I know at the time you wouldn't have thought this way, but I sure am glad they didn't want you to stop that car. Who knows what would have happened if you had gotten out?
Well, I had a .357 Magnum pistol that when I went to the law enforcement academy, I got the rank of revolver expert, so I could have put a cap in it, but I'm glad I didn't stop either, looking back on it.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. Yeah, that .357 is pretty potent as far as handguns go, but there have been quite a few instances where people have fired at one of these things with a high-powered rifle and didn't get the desired effect, so that .357 probably wouldn't have done much good at all if you had brought it to bear. Well, let's move on to the next encounter here, Donald. What happened?
I was house-sitting for this guy I met at church. He had 2 dogs and a cat. He wanted me to house-sit in August of 2007. That was at Spring Hill Condominiums. That was, let's see, from where I saw that dog man encounter, that would been about another 4 miles, 5 miles up the road where his condominiums are located. And so I used to walk for exercise and stuff like that. So I went down to the Tom Waterway Bridge, which was, all right, where I saw that encounter, that would be about 5 miles further south. I went down to the Scruggs Recreation area. There's a roadway that goes underneath the Tom Highway Bridge. It's adjacent to the waterway that you can walk about a mile down a gravel road. And there's like a little inlet cove you can pull in from the boat. If there's a lot of traffic on the waterway, you need to get out of the way of the barges, you could pull in. So I walked down there, and it was in August. It's a blustery day, you know, hot and everything. And I got down there. Nobody was there but me, and it's real isolated. And I just got this weird feeling. When I was a police officer, you have like a sixth sense. When there's danger, you know there's something there. And I felt like there was something out there in that brush looking at me, and I knew I needed to get out of there, but I can't run because I'm disabled. So I briskly walked back to my car and got in and got out of there. Never went back until last month. And when I went back, I was with a friend from Savannah, Tennessee, Walker D, that befriended me over Facebook because he read my encounters that I had placed on Ontario Dogman and Unsea World and things like that. He read it and texted me, want to be a friend, and I guess we have a kind of a kindred spirit. He's the same age I am, but he was armed. When we went down there, I felt safe because he had a .45 automatic. He also had some backup guns. And I said, you know, Walker, looking over here, this area would be prime area for Dogman or Bigfoot or both. Anyway, that was in August of 2007. I didn't see anything. I didn't smell anything, but I felt an evil presence. That's all I can say. Now, the next deal was in, let's see, let me back up a little bit. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. The fall of 2006, I went to Walmart, Savannah, to do some shopping. I was already divorced. I was coming down 128 west, going toward the dam. There's a little place called Sand Hill Holiness Church. There's a little community called Sand Hill. This guy had built a duck pond or something on the right side of the road, and he had a street light out there, and why, I don't know, but when you're coming down past the church, it goes from 45 to a 55, and I began to accelerate right at that duck pond. Here comes this creature coming right out of the road, and it was moving at a fast clip. It was the fastest animal I've ever seen move, and I saw it in the silhouette. Now, this animal was dark colored. It almost resembled that 95 creature that I saw, but it moved so fast. What I can't get over is how fast it can disappear. That's what I don't understand. I'm baffled by that one. The reason I see a lot of stuff, because that is my recreation. I drive around these back roads, and I just like to look around, get a feel of the lay of the land, and see where everything is and stuff like that.
If you're out and about that much, that would really increase the chances of laying eyes on these things. You've talked about 3 different eyes-on encounters here, Donald. Through any of these encounters, did you smell or hear anything that seemed to be emanating from the creature?
No, because I was in the car going, not stopping. Even though twice I wanted to stop, but eyewitnesses wouldn't let me. So I didn't smell it then. It didn't, no noise, no nothing. It just flashed, just like a flash card, you know, and it's gone. And like I said, the amazing thing about these creatures is how fast they suddenly appear and how fast they suddenly disappear.
Because of how brief your encounters were, the average eyewitness wouldn't be able to gather nearly as much detail as you have, but the fact that you've got all this law enforcement training means you're a trained eyewitness. I think that reason right there is why you were able to pick up so much detail. In the winter of 2008, you had another encounter. Please tell us what happened with that one.
I have a cousin. His name is Scott Edwards. He's from Atlanta, Georgia. He's got 3 college degrees. He's in the anesthetist department. He's a physician assistant in Atlanta, Georgia. His family has owned a cabin at Bruton Branch since 1965, and I kind of grew up there in the summer going over and visiting with him, and we know all about Pickwick, and he's into river journeys. We get in a ski boat and just go all over the place. He's got it fixed up like a pop-up. We sleep on it at night, and then we rough it, and the next couple of days we'll be at the Peabody in Memphis or some real nice hotel in Little Rock or something like that. So we get the best of both worlds. But he and I have been all over the whole river system, waterway system, all over mid-America. His 2 favorite spots is Land Between the Lakes at Lake Barkley State Resort Park, I've been to Grand Rivers, Kentucky, stayed there with him. Green Turtle Bay Marine, I've been all over that area. I never heard of the beast of the land between the lakes the whole time I was up there until I told my story on phantomandmonsters.com to Lon Strickler or Strikler, whatever his name is. He told me about the beast of LBL, and it would absolutely floored me. And I read that article written by Jan Thompson, and I just could not believe what I was reading. Back about 2009, I was up there, and I walked from Lake Barkley, the inn, all the way out to the highway and back for my walking and stuff. And I later read, not long ago, that there was a dogman incident right there where I was walking and didn't know it.
Yeah, there's nothing like finding out about things like that after the fact.
Yeah, because I'll tell you what, it changed I don't go up to LBL anymore. I've been all up there, and I said, you know what, Scott, I love you, but I'm not going up there anymore. And then my last encounter, when I was going to see him, was in the winter of 2008. It was over there it's called Pyburn Road. It runs between 128 and 69 Highway. And there's a little community there called Bruton Branch. There's a four-way stop convenience store there, gasoline and stuff, and there's a Baptist church next door to it. And it was right up from there, about maybe less than a quarter of a mile. There's a little knoll that overlooks the highway, the roadway. It's a busy roadway right there. And I saw that thing going to Scott, standing there looking at me, and it was I caught it the silhouette of the street light. I knew instantly what it was, and I floored it. I got out of there, and I went over to see Scott. He said, what's wrong with you, like you've seen a ghost? I said, I believe I have. I believe I have seen a ghost. Of course, he didn't understand. He thought I was crazy and stuff like that. I said, I wish I'd quit seeing these animals around here. That was my encounter in 2008. In 2010, in December, I was over at the doctor's house visiting with him. I met him at church. We loved to watch football together, so I was coming back late one night. I think it was on a Monday night, because we were watching Monday Night Football. And they just got the lights on the dam on the highway fixed. I was on the levee part of the dam. I was just coming around the corner. I was maybe about a quarter of a mile away from the four-way stop sign, and I see the biggest creature. It almost looked like the size of a moose, but it didn't have no horns on it. I floored it. When I saw it, I accelerated that Cadillac. I said, well, it's a 40-mile zone. I'm fixing to do about 70. I'm going to be getting a big ticket on this radar, because that's on the Federal Reserve. You can pay a hefty fine for speeding. So I said, I'm going to go for it. And I caught the back end of that thing, and it went right down into that like a little elbow, looks like a little triangle, where the old levee and the new levee is, and it's all full of and it just disappeared. And I stopped for a minute, I just listened, and I didn't hear nothing. I mean, dead quiet. And I thought, oh my gosh, this thing is up here next to State Park, which is the biggest resort state park in Tennessee, because it's the busiest. It's got cabins, camping, inn, restaurant, marina, golf course. It's got everything. And I mean, everybody comes over here. It's one of the well-known state parks in Tennessee, Pickwick Landing State Park. And here this creature is. And one thing about it, Vic, this creature, if you skirt the outskirts of the park where it comes in contact with Highway 57 south, you can go and hit a little small swampy area, and you can go down Hardins Creek Road past the Pickwick Exxon, and you can cut back through the woods, go straight down the Shallow Falls Golf Course, and guess where you'll end up? On Holiday Hills Road, the road I live off of.
There are plenty of places for these things to move about, and we'd never know it. Before we talk about your last encounter, Donald, I know in 2014 you started researching Missing 411. What can you tell us about that?
What happened was, my uncle, who lives in Germantown, is really wealthy, gave me a brand new Apple iPad, and he's paying for the Wi-Fi and everything. So because of his generosity in 2013. It wasn't until 2014, a year ago, that I started looking into 411. So I started listening to Coast AM, and that's when David Paulides was on. They played him up pretty big, so I listened to him, and I really got into this 411 stuff and could not believe what was going on. And so I really researched it, and I finally ordered a book, The Eastern Division. I didn't read all of it. I read quite a bit of it, and that man I befriended in Savannah, I gave him the Eastern 411 David Paulides book. I gave him a road map of all the counties, roadways, everything you can think of in Tennessee. I want him to be familiar. If he's going to go out and look for this stuff, I want him to have the knowledge I didn't have that's taken me over almost a year and a half to find out through the internet. David Paulides woke me up big time about what to do and what not to do in the woods. And see, there's woods all around me. I know these woods like the back of my hand. I walked all over. And then when I read that book and listened to all these YouTube documentaries, I would be a sitting duck had I gone back out in the woods wearing a red shirt or orange shirt or yellow shirt or bright colored shirt and crippled and not taking a gun or something to protect myself. And I've got a handgun permit. I just don't own a handgun. But I just could not believe. It scared the dog out of me, that 411 book. I decided in Thanksgiving of 2012, I have had enough of this driving at night. I quit driving my car. I quit going anywhere. The only time I went anywhere, I never drove at night again. Never. I don't go outside my house at night again, especially after this last episode. It shut me down. This thing shut me down. I'm an outdoors person, but not anymore.
Oh, I don't think anyone could blame you. Having seen these things as many times as you have, and also at the same time having a friend who wants to go out and actively seek out an encounter of his own, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to go out with him at night. I said, I don't mind doing the daytime drives and stuff like that because you can see better. I said, the nighttime, I'm just going to let him go on his own. I said, if you're going to go out on your own, go out in the full, bright moonlight because you go out there pitch dark, you're not going to see nothing, and he might be right behind you. I don't know the true strength of this animal, but what I've heard on Big Conda's 70-something episodes and other people's websites I've read, I don't know if would I go out there with a bazooka and a grenade.
Yeah, I can't say I'll blame you.
What is so scary, Vic, is this thing is now showing up in our residential areas. This is the scariest part of all. I mean, I don't know if it was on your show or maybe somebody else's. A dog man came through the doggy door and got stuck.
Yeah, that's right. That was on this show. That was just a couple of episodes back. I talked about that most recently on Bigfoot Outlaw Radio. That's the most recent interview where I talked about that encounter there. But yeah, it is unnerving.
And then there's that lady over in Huntsville, Christian, was that her name? That she was in the Army or something like that, in the military. She came home and she had an encounter right there in the woods with it. She knew enough not to run except to back out of there.
You're right. Her name was Christian. That was the encounter. Yeah, that was only a couple of episodes ago. That was pretty recent.
I've listened intently to what your interviews with these people are saying between you and David Paulides. You done messed me up.
Yeah, I can't say I'll blame you. Once you know these things are out there, and especially once you realize that just because you don't live out in the country, that doesn't mean that you're not going to bump into one. That really has a way of changing things for you, especially when you go out at night. I know of encounters that were actually inside the city limits during broad daylight. I can't share the particulars of that with you, but it does happen.
One thing I've noticed with all these documentaries and people saying this, that, and the other, the animals are coming into the cities. The big deer, the big bucks, and everything are coming in the cities to graze, so there's something out in the county that's scaring them. just pushing them into the cities, when they come in, they're going to come in after them.
Yeah, you're right. That is a good point. It's funny you mentioned that because I've noticed that just 2, 3 days ago, I was in someone's backyard and there were 3 does just laying there, and this yard is well within the suburbs. This isn't out in the country. So it sure makes you wonder why this sudden migration from all these animals into the city limits. What's behind all that? Not to say that it's got to be dogman that's causing that, but it sure does make you wonder what's behind it.
Yeah, it does. These, where I live at Windy Pines Lane, Holiday Hills, as the crow flies, I'm about 1.5 miles from the Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee state line that's out in the middle of Pickwick Lake. And all the deer that used to be in the woods are now in our front yards. So something's going on.
Yeah, that is strange. I guess inside city limits like that, they don't have to worry about predation. Let's move on, Donald, and talk about this most recent encounter you had. It wasn't an eyes-on encounter, but it had to be pretty unnerving nonetheless.
Well, this was Sunday morning, this past Sunday on November the 15th. Now, I'm going to set this up for you. Because of my medical issues, I keep my window open year-round. I've got a big box fan in there to blow air into my room. I'm in the attic room, so I've got the heater downstairs that keeps it hot. I've got to have this cold air. We were under a freeze warning, and I think that low temperature that morning was 36. Okay, it was 5:05. I heard something coming out of the woods, and I was up playing computer Yahtzee. I was up doing that, and I heard something, so I turned toward the window, and there was no barge traffic on the lake. There was nobody. I live on 2 roads. There's Dockside Cove Road that goes behind my house and Windy Pines Lane. It's been real busy this year. There was no traffic on the roads. This thing came out of the woods and started screaming. I mean, I never in my life heard a scream like that. It didn't sound like a panther or a woman screaming. It was a demonic, sinister scream that gave you chill bumps. I heard it rustling in the leaves because of the pitch. It had to be, now I didn't get a visual, but because of that pitch, it had to be upright. It had to be walking on 2s. It walked all the way down Windy Pines Lane, and when you curve, Windy Pines kind of takes a little slight curve and then kind of cuts back to the left. And right there in that curve, you look straight down this guy's backyard. You see my house. You see my window. I heard that thing scream all the way down Windy Pines Lane. It's about 0.4 of a mile long. Crossed over Holiday Hills, there's a deep ravine and hollows that go all over the place, but this goes straight to the front of Wind Springs Cove. I heard that thing scream almost down that ravine, and I didn't hear it anymore. And there are dogs all over the place around here. Not one dog barked. There was no noise but that demonic scream. It scared the fire out of me. I said, that had to be a dog man. That had to be. Because until I put 2 and 2 together, Vic, I didn't realize those things scream. I thought they just growled and grunted all the time.
Well, yeah, they seem to make a bunch of different noises. It's hard to tell what their limits are. You know, it's one thing, Donald, when you see one of these things out on the highway, who knows how far from home, but when you are inside your home, look out and see one of these things, or like in your situation there, if you're inside your home and can hear one of these things, it sure does make it personal, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've heard some noise at our house at night outside with my window open. I don't know if it's deer doing it. It could be dogman for all I know. We keep some buckets where we soak our ferns with at night, and I heard some knocking around down there around 1 o'clock in the morning and stuff, but I can't verify it was dogman. Now with this sighting and this noise and this screaming, that's nothing like I have never heard in my life. And I've been out in the woods with the wildlife fisheries and parks. The state parks that I was on, we had 600 or 700 acres, and I'd be out there going down the nature trails and everything, and I never saw or heard anything like that.
Because of all of your experience with the DNR, Parks and Rec, law enforcement, Now's a good time to ask you this. If you would have seen one of these things back then while on duty and reported that to your superior or superiors, how do you think the response would have been?
I mean, I'd been the laughing stock of the county.
Yeah, I can only imagine. People posed the idea that if a police officer sees one of these things, if a park ranger sees one, to a lot of these people, it's a no-brainer that they're going to report it. That's that. But when you think deeper into it, they'd be crazy to report it because, just like you said, you'd be laughed out of the office and probably lose your job, wouldn't you?
I wouldn't say I'd lose my job, but I'd have to give some kind of a, with law enforcement now, Vic, having to wear body cameras and cameras in their cars, that will end that kind of ridicule and public humiliation. That will put an end to all that because they will finally get on camera what this thing is. They'll have an advantage I never had before. I don't know what I would have done. I mean, I don't know what to do. I mean, I'm confused even right now talking to you about this creature. I know what I saw. I know where I saw it at. I can give you the specifics and the dates and everything, but I still have a hard time with this.
Well, if it's of any comfort, you're not the only one who's confused about these things. There are so many answers about them I'd love to have, but I just don't have.
I consider you the David Paulides of Dogman Encounters because without you, we would have no venue to voice of what we saw and where we saw it and what were the circumstances we saw it in. And I am privileged and honored to be a guest on your show tonight.
Well, thanks for the good words, but I'm honored to have you on. Before we move on and cover this last topic here, I want to bounce back to the law enforcement question. You mentioned the fact that police officers are going to be required to wear cameras now. If I understood you correctly, do you think that just because they have cameras and as a result might catch one on film someday, do you think that that's going to change anything? Because in my opinion, even if you do get the best footage, it's just going to wind up turning up missing. I don't see that going anywhere.
Well, you're probably right because I was with the Census Bureau. I want to say this about the way the government is today. I took the census in 1980 and again in 2010, and it's vastly different. I was able to do my job. Even I had questions, they would let me answer. But 2010, I questioned them. I said, you really don't have any business asking these types of questions because this has nothing to do with counting heads. And they were asking some intense questions that were of a really high personal nature. I said, you're going to anger the living stew out of people, and they're not going to say one word about it. Did you not know the Census Bureau knows where your house is, how many buildings you have in your yard, and how far they are from the street? They know everything. And not only that, I got fired after 2 weeks on the job, and I got census audited. When I had to fill out that audit, they knew everything about me, everything. Bank accounts, credit cards, everything. I don't think, since the government is giving federal funds to law enforcement agencies, they probably got, like you said, they got a code. You just don't talk about it.
Oh, I've got no doubts about that.
So you're probably right in what you just said, that the law enforcement, I don't call the law enforcement people anymore. I don't report any of this stuff. I'm going to get on Vic Contis and tell Vic, because Vic will get it out over the airways where it will be told.
I'll try to get it out there. If you only knew some of the encounters that I've heard from people who didn't want to share them publicly, there is no harm, no foul in not wanting to share them publicly, but understand, if you knew the half of it, you would just shake your head. It's just amazing, some of these encounters that people have that you'll never hear about. It's just amazing.
But I'm glad you're hearing it, even though you can't share it, that there's more to this story than these things popping up out of the woods. The reason I believe I'm seeing them on the roadway, number one, roadkill, easy meal. right there. Roadkill, easy meal. Car breaks down. I could take out that couple, changing that tire. Because, see, I did not know, had I not listened to your programs, interviews that you have conducted, I would never have known that these creatures can climb trees.
It's a scary thought, isn't it?
And so when somebody like David Paulides' book, like the guy was there, and the next minute the kid was gone, and he didn't see anything, if the thing jumps out of a tree, grabs your kid, and takes off up the tree with it, how do you know who took your kid?
That is really a scary thought. It's not good enough to keep your eyes out on the ground in every direction. Now you have to worry about attacks from above as well. That just takes it over the top.
I'm open to whatever. I don't think the American people have been given the truth about everything.
Oh, that wouldn't be the first time. I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case. I really would like to know how much the government does know about these things.
Why are all of a sudden people disappearing out of national forests, national parks, state parks? That's government controlled.
That's true. With all the missing persons cases, you sure would expect the government to do more than they have.
David Paulides said recently on Coast to Coast there's over 1,600 cases he's working on, and he hasn't even touched urban areas.
You're not the only one who's a big fan of those missing 411 shows. The most recent show that I caught on YouTube, he did talk about cases inside city limits like that, like we're used to hearing from him, happening out in the woods. If you think it's scary listening to instances of people missing the way they turn up missing out in the woods, you ought to listen to that show and hear how scary it is to find out about these people that just vanish within the city limits. Anyway, moving on, tell us about this Apache helicopter that you were telling me about in the pre-interview.
Okay, this was in October 2014. Like I said, I had my window open. I can hear the pitch, the noise. I can tell you when an ambulance is coming across Pickwick Dam or when it's coming up out of the south. There's a little fire department substation there. I can tell you the pitch of that siren, which direction it's coming from. So I was just about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, maybe a little later. I started hearing the helicopters. Now, we have the area vac medical helicopters that come out of Savannah for these car wrecks and stuff like that. We have quite a few of them around the lake, people not paying attention. But anyway, there is a deal called topics.com. You put in topics.com, Savannah, Tennessee. It kind of gives you the street talk, scuttlebutt. Some of it's bogus, but there's some true posts in there. And one post was the nighttime helicopters, and everybody started posting on there. I've read posts around all of it and around like I said, the Tennessee River cuts Hardin County right down the middle. And it's mostly river and swamp. That's what Hardin County is made up of. North of Pickwick Dam is Shallow National Military Park. So they're flying all up and down the waterway, the river, with these big, huge spotlights, treetop level. Why are they doing it, and what are they looking for? Nobody knows, and so somebody says that they're preparing for like an invasion somewhere, and this terrain is like that. I said, I've never seen anything like that in the Middle East. They would have this type of terrain, but that's what the scuttlebutt is around the area, street talk. Anyway, I hear this thing. The last time it flew right over my house, rattled the windows and everything like that. It was like late at night. I said, well, they're down here at Pickwick. I don't know what they're looking for. All right, you got Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which is above Clarksville off the Cumberland River. Then you got Columbus Air Force Base off the Tenn-Tom River down below me. And they're the only two military installations in the area that these things could come out of. And they flew from October, November, December, January, and that's the end of it. Of course, they had the Jade Helm Army maneuvers in Mississippi, but not Tennessee. So I don't know what's going on. I mean, what were they looking for?
It sure does make you wonder, and it makes you wonder why they were doing that at night instead of during the day. if it was dogman related, these things do come out in the day. In fact, there are more encounters that are reported as happening during the day than at night.
And of course, around Olivet, that's where a lot of pasture, that's where your cattle are located, in the Olivet, Pinhook Road community, all out in there, Burnt Church, Cherry Chapel. That's where all your cattle people are located in their farms out there, and he was flying all over there. This searchlight, what would the Army be looking for?
I hope it's not what we think it might be.
You never know.
That's true. Well, Donald, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, I'd like to share that we appreciate the general public, what you're doing on these interviews and documentaries and live radio talk shows or whatever you're doing to get the word out to the public that your surroundings are not as safe and secure as you once thought. Please be careful, be alert, be attentive, get off the cell phone, quit texting, start looking out the window when you hear a noise, lock all your doors, put your pets up, and lock and load.
Well, those are good words and sound advice. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on the show tonight, Donald. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vic.
Well, have yourself a great night.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you. Episode 72. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, dogmen. Our guest tonight has chosen to go by the name Lisa to keep her identity anonymous. Lisa, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for having me, Vic.
Oh, thanks for being here. Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I'm originally from Bennington, Vermont. I'm a U.S. Army veteran. My degree is in biblical studies. The area I come from has its own strange history, and it's been known as the Bennington Triangle because there was a series of disappearances back in the 1940s and 50s especially. And it's overall a pretty strange, it's a beautiful place, but a very, very strange area.
In the pre-interviews, you were telling me about all these strange things that you had dug up, information about there. It does sound like a really strange place. One of the strange things you were telling me about was all that information about the Long Trail. What can you tell us about that?
The Long Trail is part of the Appalachian Trail. A lot of hikers are up there during the summer, but some of the disappearances that took place were along the Long Trail between the small town of Woodford and Glastonbury. And Glastonbury itself is a very small, unincorporated town on what the locals call Glastonbury Dome or Glastonbury Mountain. I believe there's about 13 individuals in the Bennington area. The triangle is made up of Bennington, Somerset, and Glastonbury. So there were 13 individuals of various ages and occupations in life that disappeared, but the majority of which was on the Long Trail that leads into Glastonbury Mountain, the national forest in that area.
Sure makes you wonder how many people walking down the Appalachian Trail past there have a clue about that history. I'll bet you if they did, a lot of them would be pretty paranoid moving through that area. You were telling me about the Bennington Monster. Tell us about that.
The Bennington Monster is a local story that dates back to, I believe, the 1700s. And in fact, it was in the local newspaper at the time that a large red-haired covered creature happened to overturn a stagecoach that was along the local route that they used, I guess, for trade and transportation. Growing up in that area, every once in a while you would hear somebody talk about the Bennington Monster. It was pretty commonplace in the town as a local legend.
Yeah, that's a pretty creepy legend. It's kind of neat in a way when you're a kid growing up and you have some kind of a story like that in your local area, but when you have to go out into the woods in that same area and do whatever, that's when the fun kind of wears off, in my opinion. Speaking of strange areas and happenings, when you were around 5, that's when the strange encounters started happening in your life. Tell us about that area, this home where you grew up and all the strange things that happened around it.
Well, at this house, we were there until I think I was 6. I remember being in kindergarten. But before that, the area is located next to a large golf course and about a quarter of a mile from what they call Old Bennington, where a lot of the old colonial homes are, lots of estates with farmland, a cave that was probably about 3 miles away that was part of the local college campus. Very beautiful, very wooded, very rural. The town has not changed much in 40 years. It's got maybe 16,000 people in it total. The house that I was living in, our backyard led up to a patch of woods that had a path. It had a walking path. But this walking path led into another family's yard, and they had a playhouse. And so when I was younger, about 5, I would get into mischief, and I would go back into the woods, and I would go into the playhouse because it was fully stocked. There were toys, and there was a little table to sit at, and so I used to go back there, and every once in a while I would start to have this feeling come over me. I couldn't explain. Maybe the feeling of being watched, but I would just all of a sudden become afraid for no apparent reason, and I would just leave. And then days would pass, and I would go back. There was one time when I brought my older sister with me, and we were sitting at the little picnic table in the playhouse, and the same thing basically happened to her. She started to feel really kind of creeped out, and she said, I don't like you here. I want to go back home. And so we left and went back home. Well, one afternoon, I went to go play in the playhouse, and the people that lived on this property came home. And so I basically felt kind of trapped, and I had a really good view of the backside of their house where the sliding glass doors were, and I could see the lady in her living room, and she kept looking over at the playhouse, so she probably knew that I was there and didn't have a problem with it because she didn't say anything to me, but I was feeling like I was caught. While I was sitting there, I had that strange feeling come over me that I was being watched. And to the right of this playhouse was a birch tree that had a V in it. I looked over at the birch tree and could see this one black eye of something looking through the V at me, and I ran out of the house, and don't know how many days passed, but I know that one afternoon, and I'm going to guess it was probably late summer, maybe early fall, I got it in my head to go back there to go play. And as I was leaving my back door and in my yard, something cut me off. I looked up to see this individual covered in light brown hair, just inches from me, looking down at me, and I got a really good look at its face. And it had large black eyes. It had a nose that appeared more, pug comes to mind, like, you know, it was muzzle-like, but it just looked kind of smushed in like a pug's would. It had pointed ears on the side of its head. It didn't make a noise. It was just looking down at me, and at that time I didn't feel afraid. But something had caught its attention to, I believe, its left, and it turned its head, and I looked past it to see another individual with it, only this one was tall, lanky, and it was red-haired, which is an interesting coincidence because the Bennington Monster was said to be red-haired. But this individual looked more, for lack of a better term, more like an orangutan. That's really the only way I can describe it. Hunched over shoulders. I could see the eyes blinking, but it was so tall that it was standing in the boughs of a maple tree that was hanging over my parents' garden. So the rest of his face was kind of hidden in shadow, so I couldn't make out any details. But it turned around and it started to rip out the plants that were in the garden, and that was when I ran back into my house and shut the door, and I remember the feelings of fear kicking in. I was afraid that these things were going to come into my house and hurt my parents, and went into the living room where both of my parents were, and I said, there are monsters in the garden, and they are ripping out plants. My father was not very kind about it. He was just kind of like, yeah, sure, stop lying, don't make things up like that. And my mother said nothing, but went into the kitchen and looked out the back door, and she said, there's nothing out there. And she called me over to look, and sure enough, nothing was out there. Either that day or the next day, my parents were out in the garden, and I was in the house, and they called me out. It was destroyed. There were plants ripped up and thrown everywhere. There were large footprints. They left the tomatoes intact, interestingly enough. And my mother asked me to tell her what happened again. And so I related the story. And my parents were puzzled, definitely disturbed. My father at the time was a high school teacher, and so he thought maybe some of the kids from the local high school had come and played a prank on him. And my mother kept saying, if that's true, how can you explain these footprints? I think it must have rained or something, but the ground was really muddy, so it's not like I could make out any details of footprints, but it just was an absolute mess. So I think I stayed out there and helped them clean up a little bit. And I have kind of missing fragments of a time frame, but sometime after those events, my parents had a friend come to the house, and he brought his little girl who was about my age. We were playing in the house for a little while, and she was really shy, and I was doing my best to be friendly, and so I thought it would be a good idea to show her the playhouse because it was, you know, a great secret of mine. And so we went to the playhouse, started playing, having a good time. I think I remember she had heard something first and kind of looked afraid. I was facing out towards the little doorway and the cutout window, and I saw first the red individual walk by and go about its business, and then the second creature, the light brown in color creature, started looking. It was kind of creeping around the house, looking in the window. And it looked at the little girl that was with me first, and she started crying. And then I made direct eye contact with this thing. It had very, very large, or appeared to be really large black eyes. And there was almost this sense of recognition. That's the only way I can describe it, almost like, oh, there you are. And I dove underneath the table, and both of us are crying and shaking and screaming, and this thing pretty much stuck its feet and its legs and the bottom of its torso in the doorway, and I think it kind of had its arms folded on top of the little roof, and it was peeking down at us, and it was showing its teeth, and it was making these growling noises that sounded almost nasal-like, but I don't think it was meant to be like overly aggressive. I almost think that it was playing with us, like it was having a good time knowing that it had trapped us in the house. And so the little girl said she told me that she just wet herself. And if anybody remembers childhood really well, that's one of the most humiliating things you can go through. And so I was close enough to this thing's feet that I could only really see the tops of it. And they were arched, but I didn't know what else to do, and I started pounding on its feet and screaming at it to go away. It did. It moved away. I don't know where it took off to. I heard, no, I don't remember any sounds, nothing. I just remember grabbing this little girl's hand, and both of us ran down the path together. And her father was standing out in the backyard calling for her. And when we reached him, he instantly knew something was wrong. And she was still pretty shooken up, and I had just so she got scared and she had an accident. And so he took her home. I don't know how much time passed, but I do remember going back out into the woods, and I started talking and saying, "I'm sorry, I hit you." But I think I was doing that more because I was scared this thing would come after me. All of a sudden, it was there. And I remember sitting down, and it kind of mimicked me, and it was sitting down too, and we were facing each other, and it was definitely checking me out, and I was telling it, "I'm sorry I hit you, but you scared my friend." And it reached out with its hand, and it patted me on the head, and then it laid down on the ground in the leaf litter, and it pulled me to its side and basically held me to its side, like pinning me, and was just kind of laying there for a second. I remember it sort of moving its feet in the leaf litter and making noise, and then it instantly let me go, and it kind of flipped itself over on all fours in like a protective stance. And the only thing that comes to my mind is like something you'd see a gorilla do. And this very low, menacing growl was just emanating from its chest. And it was looking past me, and then I heard my older sister calling for me. And I got up. I think I even said something along the lines of, "Hey, that's my sister," and started running towards her to grab her so that she could come see what I was seeing. She had gotten yelled at, I believe, by my father, and she had said, I think I said, "I want you to come see my friend." I think I called it my friend. And she said, "Never mind that. Dad's really upset. He's demanding that you come home right now. He never wants you to go in these woods again." She just was ranting. We went into the house, and I know that it was around supper time. We were sitting at the table, and he said, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened." I did not feel at all that he would believe me, because he didn't believe me before when I said that there are monsters in the garden. And I said, "I took such and such, I don't remember her name, to the playhouse. She got scared, and she had an accident." And my dad just sat there for a couple minutes at least, just watching me, just thinking. And then he finally said, "Okay, well, I just got a call from whoever the man's name was." He said that she was so upset that he had to take her to the hospital, and that she told him everything. And then he said, "You are not allowed to go back there." He basically said forbid, and I remember he had to explain what forbid was. He said, "I absolutely forbid you to go into those woods ever again. Do not go back there." In light of what happened, I completely agreed with him and never made it back into those woods. Definitely took to playing in the front yard. In fact, I think I spent most of my time on the front porch until we did move. The only other occurrence which could be related that was very strange was, I'm pretty sure this happened after those encounters, but something was going on with either something was throwing rocks at the house or on the house, making all kinds of racket above our heads on the roof. And my parents were standing in the middle of the living room just looking up, trying to figure out what was going on. And we had a dog. She was a pretty tough dog. She'd been a stray that we adopted. She was a border collie, but she was just laying on the floor just shaking. My sister was gone, I think, for the night. And my parents were trying to stay as calm as possible, but it was really evident, especially in my dad's face, that she was afraid. And so I remember them just calmly saying, "Okay, honey, you're going to sleep in our room tonight," because my room was upstairs. And so I remember the four of us, me and my parents and the dog, getting in bed, and I eventually fell asleep, but the noise was continuous for a while. Those are the only events that I remember in that house, and it was sometime after we ended up moving into another part of town, which was probably about maybe 10 miles away from where those encounters took place.
I know you had to be awfully happy when you finally did move.
Yeah, I don't know. I was, and at the same time, I think there was a part of me that always kind of felt sort of lost after that incident. You know, I didn't tell anybody. Like I had told you in the pre-interview, I didn't tell anybody about those encounters for several years because, well, first I buried it, and then as I was doing research on the subject of Bigfoot, I began to remember encounters. And it took me forever to gather up the courage to tell even my husband, who, you know, I'm extremely close to, because one is frightening, you know, and you have to relive the trauma, but it's so unusual, it's hard to talk about.
Especially when you don't know how many others have experienced the same kind of things. That brings us to our next question. After holding this info for so long, why did you decide to come out and share them publicly?
Well, I felt like there's a lot of people coming forward, and the biggest thing for me, honestly, was I was waiting to hear somebody else say that they had an encounter like this. So much so that I was listening to a few other shows, mostly in the area of Bigfoot, and I would compare notes, and I would say, okay, well, you know, what they're describing doesn't sound like what I saw. That was the biggest thing that bothered me. But second, having physical contact with a creature that's not supposed to exist, it's hard to admit that, but I was also waiting for somebody else to kind of go first. And I, you know, in light of all the things that people are uncovering, you know, on the subject of cryptozoology and Dogman, which is still relatively new for me, I just felt like I couldn't hold that back anymore. I wanted to share, because if I can muster up the courage to admit that that happened, so can other people. And I think it's probably important. In the grand scheme of things, it's probably extremely important. And one of the things that comes to my mind is there are people that disappear under mysterious circumstances, and if that thing wanted to take off with me, it could have very easily. And I think the only thing, honestly, that may have stopped it was the fact that my sister was calling for me. So I just think that it's important to share, you know, to maybe further educate us as a civilization that this stuff is going on, and that we need to really be careful with what we're doing when we go out there. Because it's not, you know, this wasn't a wilderness area. It was a suburban neighborhood, which kind of makes it even more disturbing to me personally.
I can't imagine how that must have been, being that close to something like that and making physical contact with it. Like I was telling you about in the pre-interview, you're not the only eyewitness who's had an experience like that. Hopefully by sharing that with you, it will help you deal with what happened that day. I realize it's far removed. It's been a long time since that happened, but when you have something like that that's that traumatic happen to you, even though quite a bit of time can pass, it can still be hard to deal with.
I think the biggest thing is there can kind of still be a sense of aloneness with it. Most people are not going to admit that something like that happened to them. Being able to talk about it is great, and being able to share it's great, and I definitely encourage other people to do so because it can definitely be healing, and I just feel like it's something that we need to learn more about. And we'll never know everything, but if these things are happening, then we need to make it more common knowledge, I think, instead of pretending that these things don't exist.
I think you're right. When you come out and talk about something like that, I think you do grow from the experience. After you do this interview, I think you will look back on it and feel a lot better about all the things that happened because you did come out and, in an open way, talk about those experiences. Let's go back and talk about some of these bits of info that you shared with us. First of all, when your mother found those prints in the garden, did you notice a drastic change in her behavior after she saw those prints? In other words, telling you that she might have maybe thought for at least a moment that there was some kind of strange creature or creatures out there?
She definitely knew something was up. When she called me out, or when they called me out, and she showed me the mess, and she showed me everything. She was trying very hard to kind of cover all bases, because first she asked me, she said, did you do this and make up a story about monsters? And I said, no. So she threw that out completely. Okay, that obviously is not what happened. And then she just wanted to know the story again, and so I told her. And she was more open to the fact that something strange had happened, more than my father. My father was trying to reach a logical explanation. The best that he could come up with was it had to have been some of the kids from the high school coming to play a prank on me. Because, in fact, I believe one of them was right next door. But she seemed to be more open to the fact that something definitely strange was taking place. And I think she came to that conclusion before my father did. My father didn't seem to reach that conclusion until after the incident with the little girl and myself in the playhouse, and what it was that she told her father, and whatever transpired between their phone conversation. That was when my father seemed to accept that something out of the ordinary was happening.
It's a shame, though, that they didn't believe you right off the bat. I can't imagine how horrible that would be to experience something like that. Here you go to the two people you trust more than anyone else in the world, and they don't believe you, or at least in your case, they didn't believe you at first, but it would seem that they definitely believe you now.
The mother hasn't mentioned it for years, but my father still mentions the area. He mentions how much it scared him that I was going into the woods by myself, that absolutely terrified him. But I don't know if he's actually blocked out the details or not, and I haven't relayed this information to him. Maybe because they didn't believe me, and I think maybe I didn't really let that go. So I think the next thing I'll have to work on is mustering up the courage to actually talk to my father about this and tell him what I remember.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to be an easy conversation to have, but it's going to be a good one. It's a necessary one. You know, when you mentioned the fact that the big one that was in the garden was red, that's what I thought instantly was about the Bennington monster and the fact that it was reported to have been red. So maybe there was something to that legend. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, it was weird. And like I said, I really wish I'd gotten a better look at it, but I just only remember tall, lanky. I did see its feet, but not much detail. They were just hair covered. But I don't even know if it was the same type of individual that I was being confronted with. I don't know if it was the same kind of creature or not. I just didn't see that much detail to make a positive idea on it.
The one that you made contact with out in the woods that day when you went back out there to kind of break bread with it, was that the same one, without a doubt, that had stuck its lower body into the playhouse?
Yes, I think so. It was a pale brown color. I'm pretty sure it was the same one that cut me off in my yard when I first told my parents about it. I'm judging from my own height now, I don't think this thing was any more than like 5'2", only because my youngest child is still pretty young, and she's pretty petite, and just judging from how she looks up at me and how I look down at her, that's the only reference point I have. So I don't think it wasn't a very big individual, and it's very possible that it wasn't a very old individual, but I'm positive it was the same individual in all those encounters that I had.
You did a pretty good job of explaining how the big one, the red one, looked, but let's go a little deeper into the details of how this small one looked. What kind of leg structure did it have?
They were pretty straight legs. She was pretty thick hair. Okay, I think it was a she because I didn't see anything to tell me it was male whatsoever. And I did get a really good look at the legs. The tops of the feet appeared arched. The legs were long. They didn't have any canine type shape to them. And, you know, I think I remember knees, but they weren't pronounced, just more of where the knees would be, if that helps.
That does help. It was so long ago, it's got to be very difficult to remember a lot of these details. Just do the best you can to recall what you can and don't guess. Also, talking about the whole appearance thing, were there any areas of its body you remember being free of hair, or was it totally hair covered?
It was totally hair covered. Just the nose. Just the nose, but the nose looked black. It looked like a dog nose. That's really the only way I can describe it. That was black. The eyes were black. And the ears probably had finer hair on it, and they were pointed, kind of going back away from its head, if that makes sense, but on the side. But I mean, its face was completely covered in hair. It was pretty thick with hair.
Was there any special quality that those pointed ears had besides how they were positioned on its head?
Just the odd way that they pointed. It was almost like elongated, but they were at a tilt, so it looked like a human ear, and then I don't even know what you call the back part. You know, like, you know, our lobes go up, and then you kind of have this back part where it starts to meet with cartilage. All of that went back more at a triangular shape and came to a point, almost like the ears were too big for its head. And if it was a juvenile, that might have been a maturity thing. I don't really know. But I was looking at the right side of its body, where I was positioned.
As far as coloration goes on those ears, what can you tell us about how they compared in color to the rest of its head and body? Did you notice any difference that way?
They were just a little paler. I think they had hair on them, but they were just a little bit paler, so maybe a little blonder than the rest of its body. It could have been the way that the light was reflecting on them, but that's it. That's all that I remember.
What about the eyes? What you saw, I've got no doubts, was not a canine-type dog man. It was a Type 3. Type 3s have some distinctive qualities about their eyes. Were there any strange features to this thing's eyes that you noticed?
Almond-shaped, but really large and black. And the only thing that comes to my mind is like nocturnal. If you look at creatures that are nocturnal, most of them have large black eyes, and that's really what they look like. But almost like a dog's, because you know how most dogs have really dark brown or blackish looking eyes, and then you can see a little bit of the white. So there was some white. It just was mostly dominated by the blackness of its eyes.
I see. You mentioned how if this thing had wanted to carry you off into the woods, and as a result you winding up being another missing persons case, that it was fully capable of doing that. I've got no doubts about that, but I don't think that's what it had on its mind. If that's what it had intended to do, I don't think it would have just laid there with you next to its side and give a chance for your sister to show up. I think it would have just carried you off right from the start. So I don't think that's what it had in mind. Like I told you in the pre-interview also, type 3s are much less likely to be aggressive and be problematic than what a canine type would be. If it had been a canine type that you ran into in the woods that day, I would be a lot more concerned about something like that happening than with the type 3. There was that one little girl in Michigan who had that incident where she reported being taken away by that dog man who, with every indication of the description she gave, seems like that was a canine type. That was the dog man that she said took the red ball cap off of her head and ate it and all that.
Yeah, I think you have a good point. It still doesn't really bring me any comfort. It still was pretty. I mean, I was afraid when it happened. I mean, I do remember really feeling panic welled up inside me and really being afraid. It wasn't like we were sipping tea or anything like that. It was still really terrifying. I mean, once this thing was touching me and kind of had me next to it, I at least thank God I really just laid still and as still as possible because I didn't know what was going to happen.
Oh, I'd say you handled it the best way you possibly could have.
Yeah.
Yeah, by not being panicky and moving around and making a lot of noise, that was the best way to handle that. Now, you were that close. You were actually touching this thing. What did you notice as far as smell would go? Did you smell anything or not?
Nothing. Nothing that's coming to mind at all. I have no memories. I do remember the way that its fur felt, and I do remember it feeling really coarse and wiry, pretty thick. But absolutely no smell. I know that there has been putrid smells associated with cryptids, but there was nothing in this case.
Gorillas have a gland called an apocrine gland. It's under their armpits. They can use those glands to emit a strong smell. I'm pretty sure that dogmen and Sasquatch have glands like this as well. If you think about it, it wouldn't make sense if they smelled that bad all the time. If they did stink as much as they can stink, in my opinion, when they want to, how would they ever be able to sneak up on a deer? They wouldn't be able to. A deer would be able to smell them a mile away.
Right, exactly.
And also, you mentioned its muzzle. You described it as looking kind of like it had a pug-type muzzle. That muzzle, did it have that wrinkly black appearance? You mentioned that the only place on its face where it didn't have hair was its nose. When you said that, are you saying its whole muzzle region was hairless, or just the actual leathery nose part of the muzzle was hairless?
It was where its nostrils were. That appeared black and leathery. But as I had said, the face was covered in hair, and so I didn't see any details of wrinkles or anything. It just, and for some reason this is what was coming to mind, and this still really isn't even close, but if you're familiar with Jim Carrey's version of The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, the weird non-lip sort of almost pushed out part of like the nose is for some reason is what's coming to mind in a way that's lacking too. It's really just kind of hard for me to describe, and it's like when it stood at an angle it was more pronounced, but when I was facing it I couldn't really see it as well. I was little and had to crane my head to look up at this thing. It was more like it was looking down its nose at me. It wasn't bending over. It was just kind of like blocking my path, but just sort of cautiously, I guess for lack of a better term, kind of looking down at me with its eyes. But that was maybe the way that the light played, but that's what's coming to mind, that really sort of strange, almost animalistic detail in a face that also looks humanoid, for lack of a better term, is really kind of what's coming to mind with it.
That had to be awfully strange. The fact that you mentioned that it had a brachycephalic muzzle. A brachycephalic muzzle is a muzzle like what a bulldog has got, like a pug has got. It's that smushed in face look. That's a strange adaptation for a creature that makes its living the way that this creature must. Apparently it works, otherwise it wouldn't have that adaptation, but It's just a hard one for me to figure out. Most dogmen, even type 3s, seem to have a fairly pronounced muzzle. That's why it's kind of hard to make sense of why this one would look that way, but I can tell you this isn't the first time that I've heard of an instance where one like that with that brachycephalic muzzle has been reported. There's a park that was up in Canada. This gentleman contacted me about some dogmen that were up in that park, and most of them had that brachycephalic muzzle. Well, let's move on here to your next encounter, Lisa. When you were 7 or 8, you had another strange experience. Tell us about that.
Well, as I had said before, I think I was about 6 years old, and we moved to another neighborhood in the same town. And this neighborhood was up on a pretty big hill, really old, kind of stately area. I think most of the houses were built in the 1920s. And there was a mansion that was on the very top of the hill and a family plot. Our house was sort of across the street from this at an angle. And, you know, my parents, in buying the house, learned the history of the neighborhood. And they were told that that house wasn't the original. The house that they bought was built on top of the original that had burnt to the ground, and that the original house was the servants' quarters to this family that lived in the mansion. And so it was an interesting property. There was a lot of terraces for, I guess, various types of gardens in the backyard. And at the very top terrace was our garage. And I think the top part of the garage was built on to an older building that had, I don't know the proper name for them, but there were rings on the outside of the garage that I was told were for hitching horses to. And across the street from there was what I think used to be another garden area that was overgrown with trees. So the whole property had to have sat on about an acre, and half of which was just these woods. The neighborhood kind of bled into more woods that led up into the foothills, actually going in the direction of Woodford and Glastonbury that I talked to you about earlier, which might have been about a 20-minute drive from where we were on that end of town. We were in that house, let's see, I was 12 when my parents split up, and so about 6 years we were in that house. My father and my sister and I absolutely hated that house. There was always something weird going on. We had, you know, what sounded like people walking on the roof. It was a Dutch colonial, so it had an enclosed porch. My sister's bedroom and my bedroom were side by side, and so our windows were right above this particular roof over the enclosed porch. And there were times when we swear we would hear somebody walking on it. Neither one of us were brave enough to look out. And we had a lot of cats, but you could learn the distinction between a cat walking across the roof and what sounded like 2 feet walking across the roof. So that would happen on occasion, occasionally right above our heads. My room actually led up into an attic, which was really creepy to begin with anyway, but occasionally I would hear something walking on that roof. In the summertime, my sister and I would stay up late, and sometimes my parents would be out, and we would have the window, basically, it was set right before you went up the stairs. We'd have it open and just a screen. My sister would be playing music, and we would be hanging out in the living room, and we would hear something scratch on the screen. I mean, just long, slow scratches, almost as if to say, hey, I'm over here. And we would basically dare each other to go over and shut the window. She normally would just count. She'd do a countdown, and she'd run over, and she would shut the window really quick and then come back into the living room. We didn't know what it was. But it had us really, really freaked out. And, in fact, we didn't tell each other until we were adults, but both of us would spend countless nights laying in bed absolutely terrified. We would just not feel safe in that house. We'd be afraid that if something was watching us or something was in the house with us. I mean, it was unexplainable, but it was continuous. And so I believe I was 7, possibly 8, I don't know for sure what time of year it was, but I'm pretty sure there were still leaves on the tree. That rules out winter and early spring. The bathroom was like really poorly built. When you walked in, the sink is immediately to the right, then the bathtub is right behind it, and then the toilet is right behind the bathtub. So everything's on the right side of the wall. And there was a large, I guess, a lead window. Some of the windows were really pretty old. Large window, not very private, but it faced what my parents used as the driveway. They didn't really use the garage. Nobody likes the garage. I mean, that was all across the board. It creeped, that whole area creeped everybody out. But it looked like it was the foundation for another building at one point in time, and this was next to the forested part of our property. And so the bathroom window faced out towards this, and the driveway was across the street, maybe 20 feet from the house. You know, when you're a kid, things seem a little bit bigger, but I'm going to guess about 20 feet. And so I'm looking out, but I've done this several times in the middle of the night. Normally it was open. There's nobody up at that time. And I'm looking out, and I see first kind of blended into the darkness of what looks like a dog head. And then I guess my movement caught its attention, and it looked up, and it either was, you know, the way the dogs squat on their haunches and they have their front legs, it was either doing that, or it had legs that were more human-like, and the legs were drawn up to its chest. Either way, I was concentrating more on the face. And it looked like the head of a German Shepherd, and it showed me its teeth, and I imagine probably in some form of aggression, stood up and made like a move, and it might have been more like a I'm going to get you kind of move. And I remember pulling the curtains closed and running out of the bathroom and getting in bed. One thing I did forget to mention was there was knocking at the door. That would happen like in the middle of dinner, just at odd times, and my parents would open the door and there'd never be anybody there. But besides all that, that was the only time I saw something. I strongly suspect that my sister did, only because she has always been terrified of werewolves, especially any werewolf movie. I mean, even to the point where she's never gotten over it. And so I'm suspecting that she may have had a sighting as well. I don't know for sure. I haven't asked her. Like I said, all of this is still really new to me, and even sharing it's new to me. But that was the only incident where I definitely saw something, possibly in connection to all the strange noises that were happening in that house. To the point where, you know, we mentioned the way that men respond, but my father's response to either being in that house was having several conversations with my mother where he was even practically begging her to just put the house on the market so they could move. So I'm sure there are things that went on that I don't even know about.
There just might have been. I wonder if he might have seen something and didn't tell you about it.
It's very possible.
Yeah, that could very well be. Someone in his position, if he had seen one, it wouldn't make sense for him to tell you, his daughter, about it and risk scaring you even more than you already were. So that could be. I'm not sure if this happened at this property, Lisa, or the other property when you were 5 or 6, but you told me about a curfew that was placed on one of the towns where you live.
Oh, right. No, that was in Bennington, and that was, you're right. I totally forgot about that. That was in the first area where I was 5. You're right. So that happened, I'm going to guess it was probably summer, maybe. There was someone who got attacked by, the story that we were told was a lady got attacked, young lady, in the woods by somebody, and they were putting a curfew on the neighborhood. They wanted all the kids to be in by dusk. And the only reason why I even found out about it was because my older sister, of course, hung out with all the neighborhood kids, and they were talking about it. And so I asked what happened, but they were definitely shooken up. I mean, I definitely remember their body language of really just talking about it and really kind of freaked out, and everybody's sort of looking around them. I don't know if it's connected or not. But it is an interesting coincidence, given the location.
That would be something to hear about someone being attacked in the woods by who knows what, and it's so disconcerting they place a curfew on the town. That's not a good situation.
Right, or at least that neighborhood had the curfew on it. That's for sure. So I don't know. I would love to see if there's any way to research that and find out any details about it.
Yeah, probably at this point would be very hard to dig up any details, but very interesting nonetheless. Now, if I understand correctly, was it around that time when you were in bed with your parents that night, listening to those strange howling sounds?
Well, that wasn't necessarily howling. I don't really remember. I just remember there were vocalizations. I can't really describe them. Just more kind of like some weird, high-pitched, maybe whining might be a better terminology for it. Maybe some grunting, but it still sounded like something was either being thrown at the house or something was pounding on the roof. That's really the only way I can describe it. Yes, it was that house and it was that neighborhood.
So this was back before your dad seemed to come out and accept the fact that you had something strange like that around. A potential dog man. How did he try to explain that away?
He didn't. He was really trying to play it off. He was just kind of staring at the ceiling. My mother was with him. I think I asked, "What is that?" And he said, "I don't know. Why don't you come spend the night in our room?" You know, that's just all that he really did. But he took the dog too. I mean, the dog was with us. And like I said, she was a pretty tough dog. But all four of us piled into their bed for the night. And that was the only time that I can remember of an incident like that happening there. Same town, 10-mile difference between these two houses, but there was still activity at both locations, which is really disturbing too.
Yeah, that is pretty disturbing. That had to be a long night.
Oh, I remember falling asleep to the noise. I mean, I guess I felt safe because I was with my parents, you know, but I'm sure it was a pretty long night for them.
Oh, I'm sure it was. Moving on, let's talk about this slumber party experience you had. I think you were 13?
Yes. That was in the same town, still Bennington. In this area, it was very close to the local high school. I was friends with a girl who, I believe her parents had about an acre, and they kept chickens. This was when I was actually visiting. I had moved away from Vermont by this time, and I was living in the D.C. area with my mother, and I went back to visit for the summer. So it was my best friend, her cousin, and another friend of ours. So it was four of us upstairs in their house. We were playing, listening to music, you know, that kind of thing, and then I think we started to notice a noise, and it sounded like something was hitting the glass of the window. And so we kind of stopped what we were doing, and we looked out the window. My friend opened the window to see if she could get a better look or hear what was going on, and we saw a pair of glowing red eyes that were almond-shaped. And whatever this was, I believe was possibly upset because they kept chickens and something was taking off the chickens. And so her father had to actually keep them in the garage at night under lock and key. And so whatever was going on, this individual, we could see the eyes running down the length of the tree to the base, and it was keeping its eyes on the house, and then we could see it slowly rise back up, and then we would have another rock hit the house. And they weren't very big. I mean, it was more like, you know, pebble-sized rocks were being thrown. But it seemed like a really healthy distance. So this thing was flopping these rocks at the house, and my best friend actually yelled at it to stop. And, of course, got no response. It just continued to do this. And every time a car would drive by, it would look towards the car, it would turn its face away, or at least the eyes would turn away. And then once the car had passed, the eyes would come back. And it would continue to do this. And then finally, her father showed up, and it stopped. The activity stopped. He was home. We were all really, really grateful. I think she ran downstairs and told him what happened and probably brushed it off. But we were really glad that that was over. And I actually had to go back home And I spoke with her on the phone, and she told me that it came back and did the same thing for 2 more nights. So I'm really not sure what that was, but it wasn't a person.
Ooh, I'll tell you what, you talk about being paranoid. Walking from that house out to the car to go home, I'd have my head on a swivel just to make sure that I didn't get snuck up on.
Right. Well, at least I got to spend the night. So when I left, it was daylight. But even coming in, I mean, we watched her father come in from upstairs. You know, he was oblivious to anything being out there with him.
I'm glad he didn't have any trouble on that walk in, especially since he didn't know it was out there. Now, from what I understand, not long after that, there was a girl who was attacked in the woods nearby.
Mm-hmm. My best friend's sister's best friend. She was a pretty small girl, very petite. There was a path that was across the street that led to a shopping plaza that we all used to take. It's a lot quicker than going all the way around. It was kind of a rough area. I mean, you know, lots of trash back there. No nearby houses. Lots of brush. Few trees. Kind of creepy even in the daytime. I believe she was on her way to my friend's house, or she had left and was just on her way to go to the shopping plaza. I'm not sure which. But she described remembering someone, she described it as someone all dressed in black, very large, dressed in black, or at least black. She couldn't really give too many details past that. And as she was turning to face whatever, or whoever this was, something hit her head. And she woke up, she thinks it was several hours later, she woke up alone on the path, laying in the middle of the path. And she ran to my friend's house, told them what happened, and they took her to the hospital. She ended up getting stitches in her forehead. The police got involved. They tried to do an investigation. I mean, she gave them as much information as she could, but we were all scared. We were very scared at the fact that this had happened to her.
Were there any indications it might have been a person instead of a dogman or a Sasquatch? In other words, did she have any money on her? Was her money gone? If so, anything like that to point towards it being a person?
No. Nope. Whatever or whoever did this just left her on the path. She had everything that she came with. And she didn't say for sure if the way that it was worded, it did not allude to clothing. It was just more like she said as she was turning, she saw somebody, like all she could see was black, I guess was really, really kind of how it was worded. And I believe that we just assumed it was somebody all dressed in black because trying to make logic of it, that's what your mind's going to come up with. Somebody all dressed in black attacked her and just left her in the middle of the path.
If it was a dogman, it makes you wonder what its motives were. Why in the world it would knock someone upside the head like that for no seemingly good reason. But they do so many things we just don't understand. I guess I shouldn't be all that surprised. You know, when you mention that encounter there that she had with whatever it was, it makes me think about one that you had when you were walking down some railroad tracks in Massachusetts. Please tell us about that.
Well, some friends of mine and I skipped school. I went to high school in Massachusetts because that's where my dad ended up after my parents' divorce. And there were 4 of us that skipped school. 2 of them went into a convenience store, and another friend of mine, kind of my male love interest, I guess you could say, and I were walking on the railroad track. And we saw what I thought was a guy, just a really big guy, walking towards us. And he stopped me, and he kept staring at this individual, and I could just see, you know, the color drain from his face. And I kept looking at what I thought was a person, and I was like, what's the big deal? It's just a really big guy. And he said, no, that's not a guy. And as it got closer, I'm going to say it stopped, I want to say maybe 100 to 200 yards away from us, if I can remember correctly, because at that point, it had the same ears as the individual I saw when I was 5. Definitely had that weird, angled, pointed ears, but this one's This one I would describe maybe more as a muzzle. It almost appeared more like a baboon, like baboonish. And it was showing its teeth to us, which I'm beginning to think is a sign of aggression or fear or something. It was showing its teeth to us, and we were just kind of standing there looking at it, and it was looking at us. Its head was more conical shaped, though, and I remember slumped shoulders, really long legs, really long arms, just sort of gangly looking. And then it turned its left and went down the limestone incline into the bushes. And we went running back to our friends and told what we saw, and I think they thought we were joking around with them.
A sagittal crest isn't a function of anything but size, from what I understand. Maybe they don't develop that sagittal crest until they get to be a certain size. That's why the one that you saw that was so small when you were 5 or 6 didn't have one, but yet this one did. As you're describing this one that you saw, it made me wonder, have you taken a look at that picture, the picture of the Beast of Seven Shoots, so you can compare how that one that you saw that day on the tracks looked compared to the subject in that photo?
No, I haven't heard of that until now.
Well, if that's the case, next chance you get when you're online, do a search for the Beast of Seven Shoots, and after you have a chance to do that, please do let me know how what you saw that day compared to what the subject in that photo looks like.
Okay.
It sounds like a pretty good match. Sounds like a really good match, actually, color and everything. From what I understand, your grandmother saw something that just might have been a dog man.
Well, actually, it was me at my grandmother's house. If she experienced anything, she definitely was very conservative, and I don't think she would have told anybody. But this was at my grandmother's house, I believe, a month after that sighting, in the next town over, so not very far apart, because in that part of Massachusetts, they're called villages, and they're just really, really small. So her subdivision was built in the 1980s. It was really relatively new. Lots of old forests. Part of it, I think, was all a wildlife sanctuary at one point in time, and there were still parts of it that were protected. I was getting ready to go to bed, and I think I was 16. I was 16 when this was going on. So I was getting ready to go to bed, turn the light off. I remembered that I didn't pull the shades down. It was a one-story ranch house, so I was just looking out, at the night and the forest and everything, and looked down to the ground, and everything was just black. And then all of a sudden, a pair of eyes kind of, I guess, turned its head and looked up at me, and then it stood up, and it pressed its hands on either side of the window and looked in at me. And so we're looking at each other, and I noticed the same ear shape, but it was silhouetted. I don't imagine this thing couldn't have been any more than maybe 6 feet. The eyes were yellow, but they reminded me a lot of cat's eyes, just of how wide the pupil gets when they're in the dark trying to let in more light. And so I dove into my bed and basically rolled over and pulled the shade down for the other window. And this individual in no time made it on that side of the house, which was actually the front of the house, but there were some pretty big bushes that were landscaped in. As I pulled the shade down, it had made this growling, more nasally sound. That's really the only way I can describe it. And so I laid there for, I don't know how long, several minutes, trying to convince myself that I was imagining all of this and that there really was nothing there, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But I was too scared to get up and try to shut the other window, the window blind. I don't know how much time passed. I can give you a reference of what time it was, because I believe it was about 9 or 9:30, only because I know where my dad was, and he was a creature of habit. So once his headlights hit the front of the house, I heard it out there growling again, and it slapped the house or something. It bumped the house, but it was loud. Then I could hear it moving off into the trees. I could hear, snaps of like twigs and things as it moved away from the house. I was in high school, and I told my friends about it, and a lot of them were just really fascinated, and they started running through possibilities of what it could be, and werewolves came up a lot. but I didn't see any other details of this thing's face, just the eyes and the shape of the ears. So I have no way of knowing what other features it had. It was almost as if it was just a big black shadow, and I could just only see the outline and the eyes.
Up until we talked about this particular encounter, I never had any indications that you weren't telling the truth. It's because of the details, the answers that you were able to throw right back at me for the questions I gave you with regards to this particular encounter that I knew as a fact that you had in fact seen a Type 3 dog man. So, yeah, if you along the way ever wonder if I believe that you're telling me the truth about your encounter here, or your encounters plural, the answer is definitely yes, wholeheartedly.
Okay. Well, for me, the most disturbing thing is the number, but I don't know. We can talk about that in a little bit, because I've had to come up with my own theories of why it's so often, because it is unexplainable, and it's not easy talking about this at all. But like I said, I withheld it for so long because I was kind of waiting for somebody else to go first, and then I just sort of felt like, well, I'll go first, in a sense, because it's not easy. I've even heard some really incredible stories on your show, but there's always this deep sense of, you can tell that they're telling the truth, and it's real, and it's horrifyingly real, and it just, makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, even hearing it from other people. So it's an unfortunate reality, I guess, that it even happens, and I empathize with other people that have experienced this kind of stuff as well.
Oh, sure. You feel so sorry for them because it's so horrible. If you have something like this happen to you and you've got a bunch of different resources you can take advantage of to help recover from it, that's one thing. But when you see something like this and your options are so limited, it's just horrible, because how do you get better? If you don't know who to talk to or where to go, how do you recover from it? Yeah, I'm just so glad you found out about the show, and I'm glad that you're coming on the show to talk about what happened to you. That's just really good news.
And it helps me, though, too, because for me, I feel like I'm connecting the dots. Like I said, when I was I probably still will, I'm not as obsessed and fervent about it, but with, studying the subject of Bigfoot, there's commonalities when you hear other people's story of what's been written. And for me, I kept feeling like the dots weren't connecting, and it was bothering me. I felt like, okay, that's not what I saw. Why do mine look different? Or why was this behavior different? Especially when you hear people say things like Bigfoot is a benevolent creature and wouldn't hurt anybody, or is shy. And then even thinking about my own experiences, it's like, okay, well, that's not true. And if that's the case, then why did I feel like there was a sense of violence coming, especially the one I just told you about? I mean, that encounter was scary, and I don't have any doubt that if I was outside, I would have gotten attacked by that thing. Most definitely. That was just the feeling I got from it. That it meant it would have harmed if it could have harmed, if that makes sense.
One thing I'm wondering about when you're telling the story about looking out the one window, deciding to shoot across the room to close the blind on the other side of the room, and it was there almost instantly. I wonder if it was more than one dog man that was looking in at you and gave that impression that it had just been really fast and moving around the house to that window.
I have no idea. I didn't look. I think I pretty much shut my eyes and just sort of dove into bed and rolled around and grabbed it. Like I knew the room well enough to know where it was and just grabbed it and pulled it down. But you could be right. That is very possible that it was more than one.
That's one thing, hiding under the covers because you think a monster is out there, but when you know a monster or monsters are out there and you're hiding under the sheets or covers, that takes it to a whole new level.
Yeah, well, especially when there's so much time lapse and you're trying to convince yourself that you imagined it, and then you don't hear anything in that process and you start to calm down, And then when, like I said, when my dad came home, I don't know how much time lapsed, but once he came home and everything started up again, it was like, oh, wow, I really didn't imagine that. I had just convinced my mind that it didn't happen, and here comes Dad, and there's definitely something out there.
Yeah, that's not a good situation at all. Well, having said that, let's move on to the next topic here, Lisa. Not long ago, you found some prints in the ground that looked a lot like giant mountain lion prints. What happened?
Well, this is an area, I'm currently living in Middle Tennessee, where my husband's from, and this is an area where it's adjacent to a residential area that backs into several acres of woodlands, and there is an area that some of the guys in the neighborhood go and hunt that's right behind a horse farm. My husband's a hunter. We were going back into this area where there's a tree stand set up to see if we needed to set up a bait station for this coming fall. And we had just moved here from California, where I had been for the last few years. And we found this print in the mud. And the animal that came to my mind was mountain lion, because we had been used to seeing mountain lion tracks up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And so where we live, there's no apex predators here. There's no bears, at least not in this part of the state. I don't know if there's bobcats or lynx, but I doubt it. This thing would dwarf a bobcat or lynx, I'm sure. And so we were looking at it, and just the thing that came to my mind was, okay, well, there's something back here, obviously, because it left a print. And when my husband looked at it, he was like, yeah, I don't know what that is. So we just kind of left it alone, but I did tell my mother-in-law what we found, and she didn't seem real keen on wanting to talk about it or very comfortable about it, and that's fine. We lived there for a couple of months until we found our own place. I'm a chef, that's my current occupation, and so I have to go in really early to get set up for the day. One morning, just this past spring, I think it was about 4:30 in the morning, and I was getting ready to go to work, and I heard something, or I don't know, I heard something howling behind the horse pasture in the woods. It was very low, very mournful. It could have been a dog. I won't rule out that possibility. But if it was a dog, it sounded like a really good-sized individual. But there's no houses back there, which is kind of what I have a problem with. There's no houses back there, I think, for several miles. So as far as that's concerned, I think I'm just going to say it's strange, and I have no concrete answers on what left that print or what was howling in the back.
Did you ever have a chance to pull out a tape measure or use something to measure those prints to see exactly how big they were?
No, I was only comparing it to a mountain lion track, which I had probably seen, I'm going to say maybe 3 months before that. So it was still pretty fresh in my mind. And it was larger. I'm going to guess that it might have been 6 inches in width. It was very wide. But we didn't do anything special to it. I mean, right now I kind of approach those things as, okay, yeah, that's pretty strange. I'm not going to stick around here for too long. Or if I have to, I'm going to play dumb to whatever's out here, even though I know something might be out here. You know, just didn't think to really investigate it further. But because it could be something that I don't want to mess with, I'm not going to go try to stir something up. But I will be continuing to go out there on occasion. And I've just already decided that if I see something like that again, then I probably will most definitely try to take pictures, at least try to take pictures with my phone to see if I can maybe send it to you or somebody else who might have an idea of what it is.
Sure, that'd be fine. When you were looking at that print that you thought was a mountain lion track, at least initially, did you notice anything in that print that you found that day that you would not expect to find in a typical mountain lion print?
It did look like there were claws, or at least the indication of an imprint of where nails or claws might have hit the mud, I guess depending on the motion of how it put its foot down, but there were some sticking out from the padded parts of it, but it still had that shape. I only remember 4 distinct pads, and then the middle pad, which was enormous, was probably about the size of the palm of my hand. And it went into the mud. It was pretty muddy back there, so it went in nice and deep and made it a really nice print. But I didn't look for any more. We really just kind of came back there to sort of scope things out for hunting season and then just left.
So you only found that one track, no others?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, my next question was going to be the pattern that you found. Left, left, right, right, or left, right, left?
It was just one. I didn't look for any others. I mean, I was really just kind of stuck on that one. And for me, it's like, well, if there's something back here, I don't want to stick around, and I'm not going to study it too much. I'm just going to acknowledge, yes, I see this. This is strange, and kind of go about my business. I mean, for me, that's kind of, after all of my encounters, that's kind of how I have to approach being in the woods in general. So I just kind of did that, and my husband has not had an experience like this. He's extremely supportive, and I told him everything that I've gone through, and he believed me, thank God. You know, we have a deal now where if we are ever camping, because I don't want to have this affect our lifestyle, but if we're camping somewhere or if we're in the woods for any reason, if I ever sense something might be there or I just get scared, I can look at him and say, okay, it's time to go, and he'll be fine with that. So in this instance, it didn't creep me out. It was just more like, that's really strange and that shouldn't be there. Okay, let's finish up so we can get out of here and go back to the house. And I didn't have any feelings of being watched, nothing. It just was very out of place. I guess it'd be like finding a TV sitting in the middle of the forest. It was just that strange.
Oh yeah, that would be awfully strange coming across something like that. Huh. And I'm glad also you got out of the area. You didn't loiter and just hang around studying it.
No.
Well, it's about time to wrap the show up, Lisa. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share with us?
Well, I guess basically this stuff is for real. It's really out there. People really are seeing things that science will tell us doesn't exist, but they do exist. We are definitely sharing the planet with something else that is around our intelligence level. I strongly advise people not to go looking for this kind of thing because we don't know what it is, and if it is predatory and if it is a dog or canine type creature, you got to think about what we do know about them, and that honestly, if you're trying to go out and look for these things, you really are putting yourself at risk. And at the same time, I think that this needs to be talked about more, and it needs to be treated as a reality, because there are people experiencing these things that are hurting and not talking about it because we're told that monsters don't exist. That's something that we have to stop saying to ourselves. It's something that we have to stop saying to our children. I've stopped, well, pretty early on, my kids, I've never told them that there's no such thing as monsters, but if they have ever heard anything or experienced anything that scared them, I would allow them to talk about it, knowing what I've gone through individually. I think that it's good to know that there's a community of people that have experienced these things, so I'm really grateful that I came across your show and your website. I wish I could give you more details on some of this stuff, and I hope it helps people that are researching the subject, but I don't think that we'll ever know exactly what these things are or their habits. I just think that we need to be cautious and leery and trust our instincts. I mean, because it's not even just the woods. I mean, even just outside at night or just any area where you don't feel comfortable, there really may be a reason. And I think this is so commonplace now, or I'm convinced, as many encounters as I've had, I am so convinced that we are probably dealing with the unknown so much more than we admit. Those bumps you hear, anything strange, it probably really is something. And I think that we need to be aware of that and, in a sense, be okay with it and continue to live our lives as much as we can, knowing that this stuff exists and that it really is common knowledge, instead of treating it like a fairy tale or ridiculing people that come forward and share these experiences, because it's not easy. Even after the pre-interview that I had with you, Vic, when I hung up the phone, I'm pretty sure that I was experiencing shock. I couldn't focus on anything for like a good hour. I couldn't focus. I felt sick to my stomach. I think I was just really connected to the trauma of those events again. And it felt almost as real now as an adult as it did when I was a kid. So I just really hope that we come to a place in our culture where we can really just accept the fact that monsters are real.
Those are all really good words, Lisa. And something I want to share with you, too, is the fact that I am so glad your husband is so supportive of you. He hasn't laughed at you. He's there for you to talk with these things about. You mentioned the fact that when you go camping, if you ever have a strange feeling like something's not right, he's on board with the idea of just leaving right away, not questioning how you feel. I love that. If more of these eyewitnesses who I speak with about their encounters had that kind of support, it would be so much easier for them to get over their encounters. Having said that, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show tonight and sharing all the details of your encounters with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, have yourself a great night.
Okay, you too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you.